I went to my dictionary and I looked up the word abundance. And sometimes we don't have clear idea of some of the words we're using. We have a sense of it, and that's fine. And I think that's the best of it, because then we can make up whatever we want in our minds around the words that we use. But in my dictionary, it said this: abundance is ample quantity, profusion, affluence, wealth, plentifulness. You get a sense from that, don't you? And I particularly like the word affluence. I mean, there is a flow. And that's the way wealth, which, by the way, comes from the same root word that the word well does, which comes from the same word that the word whole does. So we're talking about a wholeness here. To experience life fully, to experience the abundance of life, is to experience the wholeness of life. And if we are willing to believe what we read in the scriptures and what we learn so clearly in these teachings, what we call New Thought teachings that probably go back to the oldest of the old thought also, that there is an abundance and we are already one with it all, and all we have to do is awaken to it. And that's the point that I want to make here this morning. I want to start by reading you something out of the Gospel of Matthew. I think it's very significant. As a matter of fact, it seems like I've got a lot of scripture running through my mind today. But that, you remember Jesus gave us the Sermon on the Mount. That was in about the 4th or 5th chapter of Matthew. But then over in the 7th chapter, after he wrapped up all the Beatitudes, blessed are thee, he gives a little preaching, and then he comes down to this, which I think is one of the most significant things in that whole part of the scripture. Therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine and acts upon them may be compared to a wise man who built his house upon the rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and burst against the house, and yet it did not fall, for it had been founded upon the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act upon them will be like a foolish man who built his house upon the sand. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and burst against the house, and it fell. And great was the fall. What does that have to do with abundance? Well, let me tell you what it has to do with abundance. What Jesus was talking about there, or whoever wrote this down, probably pretty good representation of what Jesus said, is consciousness. When we talk about house or edifice or any kind of a building in the scriptures, and it doesn't matter what scriptures you go to, any of the scriptures of the great traditions, enlightenment traditions of the world, and houses, buildings represent consciousness. And what he's talking about here is truth. Whoever hears the truth from whatever avenue it comes, and there's something within you that can identify with that, and you do what you are told to do, then it's like building a consciousness upon a firm foundation. And if you don't do that, it's going to fall apart on you. It's not going to sustain you. This is what we're being told, and this is what we experience in any endeavor that we make in our lives in order to be able to open ourselves and access the great abundance of the universe. Now, we start with certain premises. These are not the kinds of ideas that a large faction of our civilization would embrace. But it is what has been embraced by all of the great enlightenment traditions of the world when you really begin to look at their teachings. Basic principles. I am in you, you are in me, I am in the Father. Father coming from the ancient Aramaic, which is the word that we use, translated from another word that means provider, protector, source, as well as having a parental connotation. I am in you, you are in me. We are all in each other. We are all part of one thing, and we are in the source. We live, move, and have our being in God. Another scriptural verse, I think, comes from something Paul said. And we see the same thing in Hinduism and Buddhism, all of the traditions. In the beginning was the Word being the creative intention behind everything. And the Word was with God, the source, and the Word was God. This is John 1:1, by the way. And there was nothing made or expressed except through that Word, the projection of that Word into the creation or as the creation. So we're part of that, folks. That's basic principle. You'll find it in all the scriptures, and yet you will find it distorted terribly by teachings that want to separate us from our source. God is out there, Allah is out there, Yahweh is out there, whatever you want to call him, Sam is out there, and we are separated from that, and we have to endeavor our whole lives in order to be able to find our way back and connect so we can be one. Baloney! One of the great differences between the approach of this teaching, which is very Eastern, by the way, and of the Middle Eastern, which they often refer to as Western religions, but is really Middle Eastern, is that in a lot of the Middle Eastern teachings as expressed, not at their foundation, but as expressed, there is the belief that our great task is to finally find our way back to God and to become one, to unify with God. The great difference of that and the New Thought approach to things and the Eastern thought, Hinduism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, and so on down the line, is that you don't have to find your way back. You are already one with your source, and all you have to do is awaken to it. Now, if you're already one with the source, you are already one with the abundance of the source. You are already one with this infinite field of possibility and abundance. You live, move, and have your being within it, but somehow or another, you have covered that all over with a lot of concepts, a lot of beliefs. So this is what we are addressing this month. I could stop right there and say, take those ideas and go away from... We got some goodies back there too. Maybe I will. But take those ideas and go away with them and just work with that alone. But because I have a certain amount of time, I'm going to take that time. We talk an awful lot about demonstrating. We want to demonstrate our good. And it's a word that's used an awful lot. And sometimes people say, well, a demonstration is what you get when you set your word in motion. You decide you want a new pair of shoes or a new spouse or to get rid of an old spouse or whatever the case happens to be. And so you go through the process and then you get your demonstration. And that may be part of it. But that's not what demonstration is. Ernest Holmes says this: to demonstrate means to prove, to exemplify, to manifest, to bring forth, and this is the one that really keys it in for me, to project into our experience something that is better than we had yesterday. Less pain, less unhappiness, less poverty, less misery, more good of all kinds. This is what's meant by demonstration. And I like the word project because there's only one way to project. You can only project it from within yourself. That's what we're about. And you can only project an awareness. I won't even say an awareness. Project into your experience the abundance of the universe within you, which you live, move, and have your being. Now, I don't want to get so airy-fairy and out there that we lose track of the importance of things. I like things, folks. I like living abundantly. I like gracious livingly. Livingly. I like luxury. I like nice clothes. I like my new red shirt. My wife says, it's time you start jazzing up your life a little bit.
Way to go, Marcia.
I like nice transportation. I like to have a nice car. And I have all of these things, a little nest egg in the event that I need a little extra money to provide me with the kind of security that I want. I like all of these kinds of things. But what I like more than anything else is being able to bring to people, or at least help them, to encourage them, to realize that abundance, having abundance, is natural, it's desirable, and it is attainable for every one of us. There are not a few people in the world that are lucky or happen to have been born with the silver spoon in their mouth or whatever. Some people have been born with the silver spoon in their mouth and lost it all. Others have been born with nothing and gained it all. Others have won the lottery and lost it all. As a matter of fact, a great many have that happen. And it has to do with consciousness. Maybe some people come into this life with a greater consciousness that's been developed in the previous life or existence or whatever that is. That's fine. But that doesn't make them any different than you, because they are one with the same thing that you are one with. What was it? I'm trying to think right now, which is always difficult for me, of a quotation by Meister Eckhart. I am one with all because, no, I can experience anything I want because I am one with that to which everything is one, or something like that. Isn't that an incredible statement when you think about it, even though I garbled it a little bit? It's an incredible statement. And it's the same with us. We are already one with it all. And you know, and Jesus put it beautifully. This is the mission statement of Jesus. He was talking to a bunch of people. And he speaks out to them. And they're hanging all over the place from the rooftops and all. And he says, I have come that they, and the they includes us, might have life and have it abundantly. And there are many, many scholars that have looked at that and say, if Jesus ever had a mission statement, that had to be it. How can that not have been his mission statement? This consciousness of abundance has nothing to do with things. The things are a consequence of that. As much as we might like the things and as much as I like them. But what we emphasize is not things. We emphasize knowledge. We emphasize faith. We emphasize understanding. And all of this leads to the demonstration through the consciousness that we develop around it. It's a consciousness of acceptability. It's a consciousness of the realization that it's already there and we live within it. And then everything unfolds. Seek ye first the kingdom, and all of the things are going to follow. And you noticed in that statement, he didn't say, go find the kingdom and then you'll find everything. He said, seek it. Be on the path of consciously working toward it. And you consciously work toward the encompassment or the embracement, if you will, of all the good that there is by continuing to involve yourself in these ideas. Now, a lot of people will read a book and they'll read another book and they'll read another book and they go and say, ooh, that's wonderful, and they put the book back on their shelf and then they can admire it along with all of the others that they've read. Or sometimes some that have a lot of bookmarks in them too that they never quite get around. You know what I'm talking about. You ought to see my bookcase. But at some point, we've got to take it and involve ourselves, embrace it, embody the ideas. Faith and understanding and knowledge are going to lead to that. Which brings me again to the foundational class that we're offering right now, and it's not too late to get into. If you're interested in it, talk to me. It's 13 weeks. A pretty comprehensive study of all of these basic metaphysical ideas. You won't know it all by the time you finish it, but at least you'll know where to start. Okay, have you ever heard of a man named Dr. Frederick Eichenkotter? Dr. Frederick Eichenkotter. I've always had difficulty with that name, and I had to look it up again. Have you ever heard of Reverend Ike? That's Reverend Ike. Incredible guy. He's been around. He really hit his heyday back in the 70s, but he is going strong. Reverend Ike is the kind of guy that can offend almost everybody and has from time to time. And with his own gaudiness and opulence, like he owned, at least when I was really well aware of him and did a lot of reading of him, although I went online and got some information on him again yesterday. Reverend Ike, for instance, dresses very outrageously. That's all I can say. Reverend Ike is very dynamic. He's been referred to as a con man, as the pulpit pimp, as all kinds of things. And he used to make known the fact that he had a Rolls Royce for every day of the week. Gilded Rolls Royces, all the hardware. And it was really flying right in the face of a lot of people. And so he incurred a lot of criticism. But his contention was, it's there for you. I want to show people I can have as much as I want of anything that I want. Come and learn these teachings. I remember listening to one of his talks. Again, pretty offensive. He was doing a class, and he had, the largest class that I've ever had for a foundational course has been about 100 people. That's a pretty good sized class. In his class, he had 2,000. Can you imagine? It had to be pure lecture. And at one particular point, he turns to them and he was talking about poverty and how there's no value in poverty. And he said, the best thing you can do for the poor is not be one of them. Isn't that neat? And of course, that hits some people right upside the head because of this concept that we have that there is some value in poverty. There's no value in limitation, folks. And what he was pointing out is that poverty, or this is his message, basic message, poverty is a result of consciousness. Now, I know there are poor people all over the world, and we can make every kind of argument we want. But if we adopt that and use that as a standard for our life, all we can do is create poverty in our own lives. The best thing we can do for the poor is not be one of them, and instead be an example for them and give to them and teach them and help them. There's a statement in the Bible that the poor shall always be with us. And once again, Jesus is talking about consciousness. There will be those always with a consciousness that embraces limitation. And that's what we want to move away from. We want to be examples of the goodnesses there. And I'm not just talking about having a lot more things. I'm talking about living that wonderful spiritual life where you are filled with a sense of God, where as you go through life and grow spiritually, you feel the continual development of wanting to know more and more about God, to be able to come closer to that sense of oneness with the universe. And it is pure joy. I wish I could say that, I'm at the point that Lynn is and I walk on water, but I'm sorry. She doesn't really walk on water, and I apologize for having said that. She just multiplies the fishes and the loaves so far. But we all of us, so long as we're still in this body, unless we are an ascended master that comes back or whatever that's supposed to mean, we all have a ways to go. So we're continually developing. Another thing that Reverend Ike said on this particular tape that I was listening to that really set me off, because I was thinking to myself, how in the world could he have said that? He said, you see those doors back there? I don't want anybody coming through those doors that is poor. I don't want anybody in this church that's poor. And he went on and he elaborated. I took a big breath when I heard him say that. And then he began to elaborate and it became very clear what he was talking about. is you could be broke, you can have all kinds of problems, you can be ill, your relationship might be falling apart, you might have lost your job, you might be really down in the dumps. Those are all things we can handle. But poverty is a consciousness, and I don't want you coming into this church carrying that with you. So begin now to aim at moving past it. You may feel that way, but begin to affirm to yourself that my life is full. I live, move, and have my being within this field of opulence. I have everything I need to fully express in life, to attract into my experience those people that will support me and whom I can support in their unfolding awareness of the goodness of their own life. He's pointing out that joining the poor is not going to help him. You remember that other statement? To he who has, more shall be added, but to he who has not, even what he has shall be taken from him. This guy, Jesus, and remember, he was a Jew. He was one hell of a rabbi, He said so many things of this sort. And what he was talking about is the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And we don't like that. But that's exactly what he's talking about. He's talking about consciousness, heart, being aware. To he who has, even what he has, shall be taken from him. But to he who has, more shall be given. Oh, you got the idea. On the other hand, there is no shame in prosperity. And a lot of us tend to think that if I have too much, I'm depriving somebody else. That is not true. In the second epistle of John, I think it is, the very first chapter, he says, Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest be prosperous and in good health, even as thy soul prosper. Now for him, an enlightened disciple of the Master, he saw very clearly that it's all there. Your soul already prospers. At the elemental level, the spiritual level of you, the prosperity, the abundance, and everything is already there. And I just wish for you, and I pray for you, and this is me too, Richard Imprescia, I wish and I pray for you that you shall prosper and be in good health, health in the broadest sense of it, that is well-being, as you are at the very center of your being right now. I'm looking at the clock and my mouth is running. My mind is running. And I'm thinking, and I want to tell you about this one woman that I knew, Mrs. Reynolds. I lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I had a lovely home on a 2-acre piece of ground, and we had horses, and we had a couple of horses and all. And if you've ever been around New Mexico, or Santa Fe especially, it's a weird place. Across the street was a little retired secretary. He had a nice little home. Up the street was a psychiatrist, and next to him was, real professionals. Next to me was one of the most successful pharmacists in the city. Marcia, you remember him, Bob Dragon. He lived right next door to me. He used to be in Los Alamos, and Marcia and I both lived in Los Alamos. And directly behind me was this lovely place. It was a beautiful home. They had outbuildings. They had, not outhouses, they had outbuildings, and they had what we call stables, and a lovely piece of ground, big trees, and it looked like a pretty neat place to live. And Mrs. Reynolds used to come out and work among the grapes that she had grown on the fence line, and she had other lines of grapes too, that divided our property. And I go out and talk to her once in a while, and every time I talk to her, she'd get down to the same thing. It's just getting harder and harder to live off of your Social Security. And I didn't want to get into a lot of discussion about that with her. But one day, we did talk a little bit about it, but one day I found out that her husband had been an electrical contractor for the U.S. government, the Atomic Energy Commission at that time. And he sold his electrical contracting business, which was rather large, to EG&G. I don't know if you ever heard of that. Egerton, Gurm, Hauser, and Greer, big world class electronics and electrical firm. And he sold his business for $55 million. What is wrong with this picture when she can hardly get along on her Social Security? Well, I speculated on this. I really don't know. But she had that so ingrained. And I could pick up a certain amount of guilt that she had around this. And that is, apparently, she had so much that she couldn't quite accept that she was that better off than a lot of people, and it was not spiritual to have that much. So she created a life for herself of limitation. What good is all of that wealth, all of that abundance? So we can go both ways with this, can't we? It's a matter of what goes on in our consciousness. There is a mind with which we are one. You know, Paul said, let that mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus. Let that mind be in you that is in Christ Jesus, he said. Now, how could he say that unless there is a recognition, an understanding that there is one mind and we participate in that? And that's the one that the Christed one, any enlightened one, lives from. And all we have to do is tap that and let it into our experience. What we are about is balanced living in this life. What we are about is focusing on the good in our life. What we're about is acknowledging the abundance of life and giving some attention to the support that is here for us. Getting together with people that feel the same way you do, think the same way you do, searching in the same way that you do, and then following your inclination. And you find you all be lifted up as a result of that. Another lesson comes out of the scriptures where Jesus said, and if I be lifted up from the earth, I will draw all unto me. And if I be lifted up, and if you be lifted up, that is, if you can raise your consciousness, you will automatically attract others to you. And you're able to then project the abundance of life, as Ernest Holmes says, into your demonstration, and this becomes obvious to everyone around you, and it becomes a synergistic system, and you grow together. Let's have a little prayer. In this awareness of God as the only source, the only presence, and as we said in our affirmation this morning, this awareness is the basis of our fulfillment in every area of our life. I know that I am one with that presence. Everyone here is one with that presence. I know that there is but one mind, and that mind is my mind, for I live, move, and have my being within it. I know that there is only one love that permeates the universe, because that love is God, and I am of God, so therefore I am of that love. As I remind myself in this moment and in all subsequent moments of my life of the power, the presence, the love, the abundance, the joy, the creativity, and the intelligence of the universe, I remind myself of those universal principles being what I am and everyone else is. I can open myself now. I take a deep breath and let go of any resistance that stands in the way of my experiencing this goodness, and know that I am accessible whatever I need, everything I need, flowing into my experience, expressing itself in my life through harmony and balance. I know this truth for everyone here. I know this truth for everyone I encounter on the path that I trod. I know this truth. I rejoice in it. I give thanks for it. I allow it to be. And we say together, and so it is.